Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. I'm Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Wednesday, August 3rd, 2022. And today I'm back after a week off. It wasn't a voluntary vacation. I've actually been pretty sick, with the big one that shall not be named by our algorithm overlords. I've got a ways to go to feel 100%, but I'm getting some bouts where I feel like almost normal. And I've actually been really chomping at the bit to do the show with you guys because it makes me feel a little bit better about myself, helps me in my recovery that I'm doing things, but I'm definitely not overdoing it. Anyways, I want to just ease back into it today and then Friday, and hopefully we'll see if I can get back to normal by next week. But on this episode, I'm covering an awesome new article that we published this week by Bob Fiedler, going through 5 main warnings or flaws highlighted by Anti-Federalists about the taxing clause in Article 1, Section 8. And I think you might call them prophetic. But first of all, before getting to that, a quick hello and a huge thank you for being here, whether this is your first episode or you've been here for every single one since day one, and all the messages on Twitter and email and text that everyone's been sending me. For those of you who've been able to follow along with my random updates on social on my health condition, I really, really appreciate that. Thank you so much for all your support. I'm not going to really go through the live chat today because I want to make sure that I can. Let's see if I can get through this like 20 minutes or so without a really nasty cough. And if I do have one, I'm going to try to step towards the back here so you don't have to get it blasted into your ear. Anyways, but make sure you're following us over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. I'll publish a blog post with this for this episode and then a couple of hours after this live stream is done, depending on how much energy I have left. But sometime today, I'll definitely have it published. And there you're going to find all the different platforms we're on. You're going to find all the archives for over 4+ years for the show. And on the blog for this episode, I'll have a section of show links where you can see all the stuff that I'm referencing in this episode and read and learn more in context on your own time. Anyways, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. Let's start out right away with the taxing power. Article 1, Section 8. Clause 1, you might be familiar with it under a different name as well. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, excise shall be uniform throughout the United States. And here from Bob Fiedler. Bob, I really appreciate all the great writing you've been doing, if you happen to be here for this show, but if not, still great stuff, Bob. He says, from the beginning, the taxing clause evoked strong opposition from the Anti-Federalists. And of course, I will link to Bob's article in the show notes, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. He writes that some even warned that if the states adopted the Constitution as it was, they would experience a tyranny worse than they had endured under Britain. And he says the Anti-Federalists cited 5 major flaws, or warnings we can call them, with a general taxation clause of the new proposed Constitution. The first one is about vagueness. And this is something that I've covered in my series from the Anti-Federalists, whether it's Brutus or Cato, or now covering Patrick Henry's great speeches in the Virginia Ratifying Convention. One of the great arguments is like, okay, no matter how you tell us, Federalist supporters of the Constitution, no matter how you tell us this is supposed to be read in law, it still could be read in another way by someone somewhere else down the line. And the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists, but more so on the Anti-Federalist side, recognize that if you trusted people to do the right thing, to read things in the right way, you shouldn't be surprised that power always grows and grows and grows, no matter who's in power. So here's how Bob put it. First, they believed the clause was so vague that its interpretation could allow taxation of virtually any source within the country. Clearly dissatisfied with the Federalist explanation of the clause, Brutus, in his 5th Anti-Federalist paper, notes that the apparent vagueness of the clause could allow the federal government unlimited taxing authority. Could have said he pretty much called it on that one, right? First, he said, to detail the particulars, this is from Brutus's 5th paper, to detail the particulars comprehended in the general terms, taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, would require a volume instead of a single piece in a newspaper. Indeed, it would be a task far beyond my ability. and to which no one can be competent unless possessed of a mind capable of comprehending every possible source of revenue, for they extend to every possible way of raising money, whether by direct or indirect taxation. So Brutus warned that the combined power of general welfare and necessary and proper, we're going to talk about that combined power again in just a moment, was going to lead to an infinite and incomprehensible power. And he says again, he says it opens the door to an appointment of a swarm of revenue and excise officers to prey upon the honest and industrious part of the community, eat up their substance, and riot on the spoils of the country. This is what he's expecting from the taxing power. Like, just take that. If you say something like this today, you're called a crazy anti-government extremist. But this is a very prominent writer at the time. It opens a door to the appointment of a swarm of revenue officers to prey upon the honest. That's the taxation power, preying upon the honest, eating up their substance, and riding on the spoils of the country. I covered Brutus's views in his fifth episode, or in his fifth paper in an episode sometime last summer, July 21st, or July 26, 2021. Infinite and Incomprehensible Power, Anti-Federalist, Brutus number 5. Of course, that will be linked to in the show notes at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. So that's the first one. Number 2, Bob writes, the Anti-Federalists believe the Constitution in its present form left the states defenseless against federal overreach in the area of taxation. They actually felt that it left them defenseless in all areas, but certainly when it came to eating out their substance, which is a very powerful phrase for them, of course, they were very concerned about this. And that's what Bob pointed out as well. Here's James Philbin from Mises.org, who writes that despite the checks and balances built into the federal system, the federal farmer claimed that the individual states would provide a superior bulwark to Congress's tax-raising ability. To his dismay, however, the Constitution left no room for the states to thwart the national government from confiscating wealth and raising an army. We'll get to that army part here in just a moment as well. But here's how Federal Farmer put it. The state governments, then we are told, will stand between the arbitrary exercise of power and the people. True, they may, but armless and helpless, perhaps with the privilege of making a noise when hurt. This is no more than individuals may do. So he's saying under the structure, what's expressly spelled out in the document, when it came to this type of power, confiscating wealth, raising an army, Federal Farmer is warning like, uh-oh, they're not going to be able to do much. And Patrick Henry, if you've been checking out my episodes on his anti-federalist speeches, you know that he was probably one of the few, at least the most prominent, who actually supported the requisition system that was in effect under the Articles of Confederation. And the requisition system is one of the things that is basically cited by people as, well, this is the reason that they had to get rid of the Articles and go to the Constitution, because requisitioning wasn't working. And the way that system worked, this is just the TLDR. Basically, Congress would come up with the amount of money that they needed from each state. They would ask the state would either pay or they wouldn't. And there's some, it wasn't like a zero pay. They did spend money. They did send money. But Patrick Henry specifically liked it. Here from his speech of June 7th, 1788, Patrick Henry said, requisitions which gentlemen affect to despise. And this was a very much despised part of the system, but Patrick Henry liked it. He says, have nothing degrading in them. On this depends our political prosperity. He thought it was so essential for prosperity to use the requisition system that everyone was claiming was the biggest problem, or one of them. He said, requisitions are attended with one singular advantage. They are attended by deliberation. They secure to the states the benefit of correcting oppressive errors. If our assembly thought requisitions erroneous, if they thought the demand was too great, they might at least supplicate Congress to reconsider that it was a little too much. In other words, I guess it depends on what your view of the proper way to set up the system is. To Patrick Henry, he wanted it as purely federal, as much pure federalism as possible. And so each part of each state, each part of the union could just say, no, we're not going to participate in this. And if that led to a domino effect where they're saying, Congress, you're asking for too much money, Patrick Henry's like, that's the whole point of it. Without that type of a system, you're going to have all kinds of unlimited spending, unlimited fundraising, unlimited taxation, eating out some substance, and he's going to get a stronger one than taxation is theft here a little bit later in the show. But I thought that was an interesting point to add. So number three is, well, the swallow up the states is really the argument. Here's how Bob put it. Third, the Anti-Federalists noted that the taxing authority granted to the federal government in conjunction with the necessary and proper clause of the Constitution, it would destroy the sovereignty, final authority of the people of the states and give the federal government unlimited taxing power. A lot of these kind of overlap, but I think it's really interesting to point this out. And here from... who is this? I think it's a federal Republican. In Bob's article, I think he has it cited as a Republican Federalist, but I think it's actually It's actually from a paper by a federal Republican in, it's late 1787. Here's how he put it. To give them the power of laying taxes, duties, imposts, and excise by way of providing for the welfare of the United States, and then constitute them judges of what is necessary for these purposes, is giving them power to satisfy at the expense of the states any whim which ambition or the love of ostentation might suggest to them. In short, we were warned that they were going to have pretty much unlimited taxing power. And again, these come across as relatively prophetic if you can give an honest look what we face or what we live under today. And number 4 from Bob's article, the Anti-Federalists argued that a lack of limitation on the taxation clause would allow revenue to be channeled into military spending, particularly a giant or a large permanent standing army, which they absolutely hated. Both Federalists and Anti-Federalists alike, whether some people wanted temporary armies or only in emergencies or never wanted them, they all saw them as dangerous. And I know a lot of people today who claim to be constitutionalists seem to think you can never have enough spending when it comes to our current permanent standing army. But the founding generation absolutely loathed the institution. And of course, they saw the effects of it firsthand in Boston during the massacre there and elsewhere. They loathe it. Here's James Madison, for example, talking about that. As the greatest danger to liberty is from large standing armies, it is best to prevent them by an effectual provision for a good militia. Here from Bob, he says, Samuel Bryan, writing under the name Sentinel, argued that the new nation was moving further towards militarism than even Britain, as Parliament was only allowed to authorize the raising of troops for 1 year at a time. So he's making the case, like, look, we fought a long, bloody war to get away from these people, to establish a land of the free, a land of liberty, or a land where liberty has a chance, and we're creating a system where they have more restrictions on a standing army than we will. Bob goes on, he says, however, the Anti-Federalists understood that the real danger of the Army Clause lay in its coupling with the General Taxation Clause. Here's from the Old Whig, the unlimited power of taxation will give them the command of all the treasures of the continent. A standing army will be wholly at their devotion. Well, there's James Madison again, if you guys are watching the video. But I covered these views on the dangers of a standing army and why the founding generation supported the natural individual right to keep and bear arms as a tool to reduce or eliminate the need for those permanent standing armies in an episode just in June of this year. Second Amendment to prevent the greatest danger to liberty. I will link to that episode in the show notes. Please do check it out if you haven't, or if you want just a refresh on another episode, if you just don't get enough of me talking, I will link to that in the show notes as well. And that brings me to number 5. It's double trouble. And Patrick Henry, and this is going to be good, I think. Patrick Henry, Bob writes, at the Virginia Ratifying Convention, introduced a 5th criticism of the General Taxation Clause. Henry argued that by ascending to the new Constitution, the people of the states would subject themselves to a situation of double taxation. Here's Patrick Henry's speech of June 5th, 1788. He said, in this scheme of energetic government, the people will find two sets of tax gatherers, the state and the federal sheriffs. This, he said, it seems to me, will produce such dreadful oppression as the people cannot possibly bear. The federal sheriff may commit what oppression, make what distresses he pleases, and ruin you with impunity. For how are you to tie his hands? And we have this type of question yet today. And even when we make strides in our efforts to undermine and defeat federal programs on a state, local, and individual level, there's still that, what's the phrase, a 600-pound gorilla in the room, the IRS, right? There's still that power of federal taxation. And then on top of it, the 16th Amendment, which, man, just 1913 certainly was not a good year for liberty, for the Constitution, for humanity, really. And that's really, it's still there. And Patrick Henry was concerned about it well before they even thought of a 16th Amendment. Now, again, from Patrick Henry, and I think this one more time is really for those of you who love that phrase, taxation is theft. And here's Patrick Henry. He said, have you any sufficiently decided means of preventing him from sucking your blood by speculations, commissions, and fees? Thus, thousands of your people will be most shamefully robbed. Our state sheriffs, those unfeeling bloodsuckers, have, under the watchful eye of our legislature, committed the most horrid and barbarous ravages on our people. So talking about this taxation power, this taxing clause, Patrick Henry is saying the people will be most shamefully robbed. So to Patrick Henry, taxation isn't theft. The federal taxation is certainly robbery. Well, those are the 5. I hope you guys found this interesting. Of course, I will link to Bob's full article in the show notes, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today and some patience while I needed some time to rest up. I probably will be doing a lot more resting up in the days to come until I'm fully ready to be back on my feet and working full bore. I really appreciate you being here. If you support what we do, nothing helps us get the job done and reach and teach more and more people about these essential principles more than the financial faith and support of our members. You can join us today for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. It's all spelled out, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members, and other things that can help. That's free and easy peasy, smashing the like button, leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast platform, comments, especially in the archive, subscribing, getting notifications, all that stuff can trigger algorithms and tell them to show the program to more people. Again, thank you so much for being here. I hope you're having a good week so far. I hope this was an interesting and educational episode, and I'll see you next time here on the Path to Liberty.